Well, hey everybody, it's Sandy and welcome back to my channel dedicated to helping you advocate for your own health one topic at a time. So some of you guys have been following me for a while know that I'm in a cast now because I had a procedure done for my thumb CMC joint arthritis. I had a tendon transfer and I had a choice of there were different kinds of surgeries that they can do for this. Of course, I had a choice. There's all different surgeons that do this work. I've also been a nurse anesthetist for over 30 years, so I'm fortunate to have a lot of hindsight, having watched a lot of surgeons do a lot of different procedures. Yeah, so I want to share with you what I've learned. So I consider myself just so fortunate to have had a wonderful career practicing nurse anesthesia for over 30 years. For many different reasons, but not the least of which is that I have acquired a bird's eye view. I have a lot of hindsight. I've watched a lot of procedures come and go like fashion. Yes, they do. Procedures come and go like fashion. I've seen a lot of different surgeons all who do the same procedure and been able to see comparisons. And most importantly, I think I've learned how to choose providers. I've learned how to choose a surgeon and choose a procedure when that's applicable. And I want to share with you, to the best of my ability, some of the kinds of things you might look for, not having the background that I have, but to help you make a really good decision. So the genesis of this has really been a long time in the making. I have recently joined a Facebook group where people talk all about the thumb arthritis. It's the thumb basal joint arthritis. Lots of people have had different procedures. There are different ways to handle this kind of arthritis. And I see what's happening in there is like sort of a microcosm of what I've seen over the past 30 years, or at least the last 20, because, it took a while before I had any hindsight. What I'm seeing in that group is people making all kinds of decisions or trying to help each other make decisions. And all I want to do is get in there and write prolifically to each person because I just feel like I want to help everybody make a good decision about what they're going to do for this problem. And that really applies to just about any kind of problem. It's a really big undertaking to choose a surgeon, and sometimes you have a choice of procedure. Now, of course, if you are brought in on a trauma stretcher from a gunshot wound or something, you don't really have many choices. You're just going to hope for the best, and you're going to be in the hands of a trauma surgeon. For something that's elective and for something where there are different things you can do, you are going to have some choices. So here's my best advice on trying to find the forest through the trees and ending up with a good result. First and foremost, the tail does not wag the dog. So firstly, I'm going to talk about conditions where you have a choice of different kinds of procedures. And this is one of them. So that's why this came up, like I said. So there is what I've had done, which is sort of the long-standing procedure. It's been around for many, many years. And it's the thumb arthroplasty with a tendon transfer. And it has the longer recovery. It's a tough row to hoe. And it's a tough thing to go through. And I knew it was going in. On the other hand, it has a very high success rate, like depending on who you read, 96, 98%, something like that, very high, and over a very long period of time, and it tends to be permanent. So you get that good result and it's yours, it's done, you're never going to do anything to that joint again. Now, that's not 100%. That doesn't mean people don't have this procedure done and not have a complication or not hit a bump in the road along the way, but those are the numbers. Every now and then a new procedure comes along, and in this case, there's something called the tightrope procedure. Now, I'm not knocking the tightrope procedure, so please don't get me wrong. Let me preface this by saying that the tightrope procedure might be the best thing for you. It might be the best thing in the long run, whatever. But right now, the tightrope procedure is like kind of new. If you look it up, you'll see even tightrope, like there's a little trademark there. So there's a particular device that they're using for that. And there are only very few surgeons who are doing it. What I want to say here is beware that you're chasing the result and you're not chasing the procedure, because you could get kind of distracted and go down a road that isn't really going to take you to the best results. I've seen a lot of procedures come and go, and yes, they do. They come and go like fashion, and very often when a procedure is new, it seems like it's great. It's going to replace all its predecessors. It's the new thing. It's the be-all, end-all, and it's usually quicker recovery, less pain. It's usually all these things that sound wonderful. In general, looking in my rearview mirror, what I typically see with that kind of thing is that it is until we find the problems with it. And it takes a while. We need a certain amount of hindsight before we can see problems that might be commonalities with that procedure, particularly while it's new, because there aren't that many people having it done yet. There aren't that many surgeons doing it. So usually in some time we do find, oh, wait a minute, well, here's one of the problems that comes up with it. And here's another problem that it has. And that's not to say that the original traditional procedure didn't have problems too. Like any procedure is going to have some problems. But my point is there are usually some kinks to get worked out when something is really super new. And I'm not sure that I want to be like the first generation of patient that has it done anyway. Even if that procedure is ultimately going to replace its traditional predecessor, usually that only happens after several revisions and the procedure evolves quite a bit. And this gets fixed and that gets tweaked. And, usually when it's in its infancy, it's not really ready to replace what was the traditional procedure, its predecessor, that it's trying to improve upon. In the case of the tendon transfer versus the tightrope boasts a much quicker recovery, much less in the way of rehab. It's just an easier post-operative course. That doesn't mean it's going to be the better outcome. So the only data that I've seen published at this point, I've only seen one study that actually compares the two, and it was favorable toward the tightrope procedure, but if you looked at it, it was measuring its outcomes all by patient surveys and at about 3 months out. So that's very early on in the recovery with a tendon transfer. It's not early on in the recovery with a tightrope. I would fully expect that at a 3-month post-operative mark, people who've had a tightrope procedure would be reporting a much more complete recovery than people who have had the tendon transfer, because you're just kind of becoming independent at 3 months out. And that doesn't even begin to address all the flaws with doing a study that relies on patient surveys to measure results, because that's not empirical measurement. Ideally, you'd have some kind of measurement of an empirical outcome. I don't want to go too far down the road of the tightrope versus the CMC joint, because I'm trying to talk about surgeries in general so that you can generalize this. Maybe you're looking at having another kind of surgery and you're looking at finding another kind of surgeon. And the issue with hand surgery, because it's so fresh in my mind from my own experience recently, is just kind of serving as a good example. But as far as the different CMC joint procedures are concerned, I'm not a betting girl, but if I had to bet, I would not bet that the tightrope procedure is going to replace the CMC arthroplasty with a tendon transfer permanently anyway, and here's why. It's very unusual for something to overtake and outshine a procedure that has such a high success rate that is permanent anyway. It's very hard to improve upon something like 96% success that's permanent. And, if I had to bet, the tightrope's not going to be able to stand that test of time. And that brings me to a second thing to keep in mind, which is that generally I think it's better to find yourself a good surgeon who has good outcomes and lots of history doing a lot of what that person does, rather than chasing a particular procedure and then having to find a surgeon who performs it. So in the case where you have a choice of different kinds of things, I know I've seen people saying, well, I want the tightrope procedure and I've got to find a surgeon who does the tightrope procedure somewhere. Yeah, that's because the procedure is so new and so not widely used that you're not seeing it that much. I'm not saying don't consult with somebody who does it. Certainly go ahead and consult, but you have to realize that's a bit of a biased consultation, right? So it's a little bit like if I need to get my roof replaced and I contact a company that specializes in metal roofs and then start asking them about shingles. So I'm not really going to get an objective answer with a bird's eye view. Somebody who is doing these procedures is sort of invested in being one of those people who does this procedure. They might have even bought into some of the equipment that this procedure uses. And that person wants to do more and more in those procedures. I'm not saying that won't be the best thing for you. I'm saying that if you want to do a thorough investigation and make a good decision, you're also going to talk to other people who have a little less of a myopic view. So overall, in my opinion, my experience tells me that it's better to try to find the right surgeon. And by that, I mean a surgeon who's willing to discuss with you his or her results, and somebody who normally gets really good results, because that's what this is about. It's about the results long term. And then let that person get the results he or she normally gets by doing the work he or she normally does. I kind of look at it like this is a journey, and it's not really about the short term. It's really about how do I get myself the best possibility of getting a really good long-term option. Now, there's no guarantees in life. It doesn't mean you're going to have everything perfect, and it doesn't mean it's going to all go well. I kind of think that mirrors like a lot of things in life, right? How many decisions where you're faced with a choice between what feels better at the moment or what's going to be a tough row to hoe? Yeah, which one is usually the better option? It's, in my experience, it's the one that's maybe the tougher row to hoe, but it's going to get me where I want to be. Try to keep your eyes on the prize and not worry too much about the short run, or the mechanics or how it's done, try to go to somebody who gets really good results, gets them consistently, has gotten them a lot. Another thing you might look for is a surgeon who, when you ask a question about something or you're discussing risks, there's sort of a flow chart that goes through his or her brain and rolls off the tongue. So you can tell they really are practiced at it. So they could be, oh, I usually do this. Sometimes we see that. And if that's the case, then I can do this and such. Sometimes we have this happen. In that case, what we'll do is this and that and the other thing. And they should also be willing to tell you their outcomes. You should be able to compare their outcomes with outcomes across the board. So if this kind of surgery is something like a 96% success rate and your surgeon says they're not going to tell you their percent success rate or they don't know, that's not a good sign. Somebody who says that they have something like 98% success, that's an excellent sign. So of course, that's another indication that you should let them do their job the way they normally do it and not worry so much about which kind of equipment they use or, which procedure they're doing. I'll just talk about another example of a similar situation. A while back, there was a fairly new procedure. It's not so new anymore, but it was uterine ablation. And in a uterine ablation, there's an area of the uterus, a lining that's destroyed, so you no longer shed the endometrium once a month. And when it first came out, it was all the rage. And frankly, everybody was having them electively. Anybody who was done having children said, oh, this will be the greatest thing in the world. I don't have to deal with periods anymore. I stood back and watched that because at that point, I had already had something like 20 years of experience behind me. And again, I knew that sometimes we think something new is the be all, end all, latest, greatest, most wonderful thing. And later on, we learned that, well, no, it's not. And of course, it turned out that these uterine ablations were neither benign nor were they risk-free. So, sometimes they're great. In some cases, depending on what the problem is, why you present for the uterine ablation, it might be the best thing to do. But first of all, it turned out that there were any number of pieces of equipment that they could use to perform the uterine ablation. And nowadays, I believe only 2 of all the different kinds of appliances they use for this are available on the market now. So the vast majority of the machines that were out there available for uterine ablation are no longer being used. So that already tells you there were some problems with those. Yes, I'm glad I wasn't part of that generation. While it was new, they figured that out. They revised how they do uterine ablations. My point is that when things are rather new, we tend to hear more about the upside, right? Because that's why they were created. They were created to improve upon whatever was there before. The tightrope procedure was created to improve upon the arthroplasty with the tendon transfer, and maybe it will. And in some ways it does. And the uterine ablation was created to improve upon the fact that women had to otherwise undergo a full hysterectomy if you were going to be needing this anyway. What I've noticed is that with most things like this, what happens over time and what's already happened like with the uterine ablation is that things get revised because we find out that they do have issues just like anything else, that those things just aren't evident when the procedure is new. I also find that if the procedure does stick around, if it makes it for the long haul, we usually find that it's good for some certain subset of the population. So let's say, for instance, the arthroplasty with the tendon transfer is going to be good for most people, and the tightrope will be good if and only if you're at this stage of the arthritis, or you don't have this problem yet, or you're a certain number of years old, whatever it might be. I don't know what it's going to be. And this is all a little bit of reading the tea leaves, but my common sense alone tells me that the tightrope will be no exception to any other new procedure that I've seen over my 30 years make it on the scene. Sometimes they go away completely, and if they stick around, they usually stick around after they've been revised a little and after they've come up with some sort of a decision-making tool to determine who is the best candidate for this procedure. I hope I don't turn anybody off who has chosen a tightrope or wants to do a tightrope procedure, because this is just sort of served as an example. It was a good tool for me to make a more general statement because I'm trying to help people learn how to choose with some of these things. And I'm not trying to knock it because I believe it has its place. I just don't know if that's been completely elucidated yet at this stage. And it's only one reason why I didn't think I would be a good candidate. I have end-stage arthritis. So I'm not trying to say that you've made the wrong decision or scare you if you're having that tightrope procedure. I'm just trying to capitalize on the fact that I had a good example handy in order to illustrate something that I have been trying to articulate over a long period of time in helping people that I love and in now helping a wider audience on YouTube to make some good decisions. So at a very minimum, ask a lot of really good questions. Focus first on finding a really good surgeon and then talk about the different options with procedures. That's sort of the bottom line in the take home. Now, I'm sure some people are going to thoroughly disagree with me. I am very open to feedback. I am very open to vigorous debate when it comes to the comment section, so please feel free to be prolific. I hope this was helpful either way. Even if it kind of rubs you the wrong way, I hope it was a little bit helpful. So let me know, and until next time, be well. Bye-bye.